If I was as angsty about doing this podcast as Matt LaFleur has been answering questions about Jair Alexander's shoulder injury, I may not even finish it. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Delray. Today, from the Packers side of things, we are diving into Packers versus Steelers, getting to know the Steelers and how they seemingly have a winning record in spite of some contradictory stats that we'll be getting to in just a little bit. But first up, the injury report. We now have the questionables, the doubtfuls, and the outs for this Week 10 matchup coming up on Sunday. For the Packers side first, doubtful Jair Alexander. Along with Jair, also inside linebacker Quay Walker. Now, interesting notes about both of these individuals. Matt LaFleur does not sound thrilled about the injury to Jair Alexander in any way, shape, or form. In fact, the last couple of days when reporters have asked questions about Jair, he's straight up cut them off. And he's made it very, very clear that I do not want to discuss this injury. When pressed a little bit today, he did make mention that, there's concern there. So it's really hard to get a read on the situation. I will say, though, Tom Silverstein of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, he apparently did some digging with his sources, and what he has reported is that it is a shoulder injury for Jair Alexander, but it is not the same shoulder that he had his massive injury with a few years ago. So that can at least, be a ray of light in this situation. But I will say, given that Jair is now dealing with multiple injuries this year in a losing year, no, the optics are not good. And frankly, the Packers, again, are not doing one of their players any service in this lack of transparency that they're, again, showing. I do think that there's other ways to handle these questions from Matt LaFleur, but it's very, very evident that he is not necessarily frustrated with Jair. And I personally am never going to hold it against the guy for being hurt until I know for sure that he's not hurt. But the Packers aren't really doing much of a service here, and we can say unequivocally, Matt LaFleur is very, very frustrated, at the very least, with the situation around Jair Alexander looking likely to miss another game after finally having performed at such a high level for the back half of the Rams game. In case you're wondering what that does to the defensive lineup, it looks by all accounts that Carrington Valentine and Corey Ballentine are going to be your two starting boundary corners, with Rochelle in reserve and what will inevitably be another practice squad elevation. So get ready for that. Now, moving on to Quay Walker. When asked, Matt LaFleur did mention that there is no long-term concern with Quay. They just have to get things right there. In terms of other tags that the Packers assigned today, there's a bunch of questionable dudes with, of course, varying degrees of questionableness in their status for Sunday. Kenny Clark, Rudy Ford, Josh Myers, Yosh Nijman, and Jon Runyan Jr. all got the questionable tag. And yeah, you heard that right. That is 3 of the preferred starting offensive linemen at this point receiving some form of questionable tag. And then Rudy Ford and Kenny Clark as well. For the Steelers, they've also got a couple marquee injuries on their side. Minkah Fitzpatrick, their all-world safety, he is out, as is Montravius Adams, the defensive lineman. He is out as well, which means Keanu Benton, the rookie from Wisconsin, is looking to get a larger role than typically performed. So no Montravius Adams revenge game here against the Packers. But in addition, Packer fans may not know that the Steelers also have 2 of their larger players on IR. That would be linebacker Cole Holcomb and then tight end Pat Freiermuth, both on IR for the Steelers. Felt the need to update you on those 2 as well. Overall, the Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers, you really could call them sister franchises from the NFC and the AFC. These 2 teams have a ton in common. One, how they organizationally structure things, how they are very slow to move in terms of personnel matters. They believe that coaches should be there for the long haul, that there's going to be ebbs and flows. These 2 teams do not move quickly. Both of these teams also put a very high priority on character when drafting. Speaking of drafting, both of these teams are draft and develop franchises that really only go get free agents when it's necessary to plug holes because the drafting didn't work. And as you may hear, the Pittsburgh Steelers did a fair amount of that this year. Even beyond that, though, This year, these two teams are even more similar. They're both starting young quarterbacks. They both have a better defense than their yardage totals and what they've given up would actually lead you to believe. They're both blue-collar teams in a lot of different ways, and they even both have a coordinator that the vast majority of the fan base for each franchise hates. Matt Canada for the Steelers and Joe Barry for the Green Bay Packers. So something to keep in mind, these two teams are not just kind of similar, like weirdly similar. The Steelers to this point are 5-3. They've racked up wins against the Browns, Raiders, Ravens, Rams, and Titans, with losses against the 49ers, Texans, and Jaguars. Interesting to note, all of their wins are within 7 points. 2 of their 3 losses, though, were blowouts where they lost by more than 20. Those losses would be from the 49ers and the Texans. They are coached by Mike Tomlin, who's been coaching since 2007 and, as everyone knows, has never had a losing record as a head coach dating all the way back to 2007. His career record is 168 and 96. Offensive coordinator is Matt Canada and defensive coordinator Terrell Austin. So how are these Pittsburgh Steelers different than they were last year? They lost a couple of free agents. That would be Devin Bush, Cameron Sutton, Terrell Edmonds. And then they added a bunch of free agents. Allen Robinson, the wide receiver. Patrick Peterson, cornerback. Landon Roberts, linebacker. Isaac Sumalo, their offensive guard. And then Keanu Neal, who's been starting at safety for them. They also had a very significant draft this year in the form of Broderick Jones, who now is starting for them at right tackle. Joey Porter Jr., who by all accounts has become their cornerback 1. Keanu Benton from Wisconsin, who's going to be starting now in the place of Montravius Adams. Tight end Darnell Washington, what so many Packer fans hoped would be the pick of destiny to replace Mercedes Lewis, actually wound up being a Pittsburgh Steeler and is performing now for the Steelers in a way that you basically expect. And then also worth mentioning, Nick Herbig, another University of Wisconsin alum, was drafted by the Steelers. But where do they rank? Where do they rank offensively? Well, passing per game, they get 188 yards per game. That's 24th in the NFL. In case you're wondering, that's worse than Green Bay. In terms of rushing yards per game, they get 90.5 rushing yards per game. That's 24th in the NFL. Worse than Green Bay. Scoring, they put up 16.6 points per game. That's 29th in the NFL. Worse than Green Bay. So what's notable here? How in the sweet goodness do they have 5 wins? Right? You rattle all that off. 24th, 29th, all worse than Green Bay, who only has a couple of wins on the season. So how exactly have the Pittsburgh Steelers gotten these wins? Well, we'll get to that in just a little bit. If you're wondering about some Pickett-specific data, though, here it is. Overall, Pickett has a 61% completion rate with 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions thus far on the year. According to PFF, he has 8 big-time throws and 6 turnover-worthy plays. As for where he throws the ball, left, center, right, it's all fairly even. There's nothing real tendency there from Pickett. However, this is another small ball team. 60% of his attempts have either been behind the line of scrimmage or within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage. And that's partly because he's been under pressure on about 40% of his dropbacks, in spite of only being blitzed on 26% of them. While his overall performance has been worse under pressure in terms of completion percentage, yards per completion, all that kind of stuff, that's all worse under pressure. It should be noted that actually 3 of his 4 interceptions have occurred on plays when he was deemed as kept clean. So now defense. Defensively, passing yards per game. They give up 244 yards per game through the air. That's 25th in the NFL and substantially worse than your Green Bay Packers. Rushing yards per game. They give up 133.1 rushing yards per game. That is worse than Green Bay. And scoring 20.4 points per game allowed. That is worse than Green Bay. Are you picking up on a trend? One of these teams has a winning record, and it's the team that seems to do worse in most facets of the game. So how, again, I ask you, does this team have 5 wins on the year? And pretty simply, here it is, because this is what Green Bay isn't good at. They are at turnover margin +1 per game. That's tied for 3rd in the NFL, including leading the league in forced fumbles to this juncture. Sacks per game for the Pittsburgh Steelers, they get 3.3 sacks per game. That is tied for 6th in the NFL. The vast majority of that coming from TJ Watt and Highsmith. And then in terms of penalties per game, they only get 5.8 penalties per game. That's good for 9th in the NFL. Green Bay still in last place, although not in last place alone anymore. They are now tied with the Dallas Cowboys for being dead last in the NFL with 7.5 penalties per game. See, the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, they will absolutely allow you to move the ball on them. But after you advance the ball, they come up with the big sack, the big turnover. They make the stop, right? Unlike what we often see the Green Bay Packers have happen to them, is they allow the yardage and then somehow, be it a field goal or something comes away with points. The Packers are one of the fewest, or have some of the fewest turnovers in the NFL this year. Certainly not the case for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Basically, this is a team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, that knows how to win. That's how they've racked up 5 wins. And that sounds overly simplistic, but the thing is, they do just enough to keep games close, and then they don't mess up. And it's what the Packers are trying to learn to do. For the Steelers, it's worked, right? But then when they do mess up, it goes really bad, as evidenced by those 2 bad losses to the Texans and 49ers. It's like the Steelers play, for the most part, a very clean brand of football. They get the big plays when they need them, and they don't penalize themselves to back themselves up. That's what the Packers are trying to learn to do. It's like the Steelers are just kind of one step ahead in that overall team maturation on the way to progressing to being a contender again, right? And that's how they have 5 wins versus the Green Bay Packers, who obviously have fewer than that. A special note about the Pittsburgh Steelers defenses, though. Peter Bukowski noted on Twitter that the Steelers are excellent against wide receiver 1s, but 23rd in DVOA against wide receiver 2s and 25th in DVOA against wide receiver 3s. Ultimately, that's where the ball gets moved against them. And that's where they're going to be especially vulnerable with Minkah Fitzpatrick needing to sit this game out. In addition, the Steelers are worse at tackling than they traditionally have been. 2 of their top tacklers are actually out in the form of Fitzpatrick and Holcomb. That does leave Highsmith, who's overall the best tackler on the team, as TJ Watt, also a very strong tackler. But those are the only 2 starters now on defense, or what's projected to be their starting lineup on Sunday, with missed tackle rates under 10%. As for the percentages for their secondary, Levi Wallace, starting corner, misses 10.7% of his tackles. Keanu Neal, safety, 18.4%. Patrick Peterson, quarterback, 19.4%. KZ, another safety, 19.5%. And Joey Porter Jr., phenom rookie corner, he is missing 25% of his tackles. They're one of the best teams in the league at swarming defensively, no doubt about it. But if you could catch them in space, especially the secondary, you may very well be able to make them miss. Other stats of note here, just a couple little ones. In terms of plays per game, expect this to be a very, very slow game. The Pittsburgh Steelers are 28th in the NFL at 59.4 plays run per game. The Green Bay Packers are 26th at 59.9. In terms of special teams, the Pittsburgh Steelers receive a grade from PFF of 77. That's good for 17th in the NFL. Green Bay Packers right behind them, being 18th in the NFL. So, how do the Green Bay Packers beat these Pittsburgh Steelers? Number 1, stay ahead of the sticks. This could very easily be a quicksand game for the Green Bay Packers. If you're familiar with that movie, The Replacements, one of my all-time favorite movies with Keanu Reeves, Gene Hackman. But in that movie, they describe quicksand as on the football field, you make one mistake. You try harder to overcome that mistake, and you just wind up making another one until you just sink farther and farther. And the harder you fight, the more you fall, the more you sink. That's quicksand. And this could become a quicksand game for the Green Bay Packers. If they screw up something innocuous, like a first quarter first down, right? And then a second down, and then you wind up in 3rd and long, that is exactly when this Pittsburgh Steelers defense is built to strike. You cannot wind up in these 3rd and long situations because Watt and Highsmith will just pin their ears back and annihilate this line basically everyone except for maybe Zach Tom. And even then, I don't love the Zach Tom versus TJ Watt matchup that may be occurring. And it's not just Watt. That's the thing. So many fans are leaving the impression that so much of the Steelers' pressure comes from TJ Watt. And it does. Don't get me wrong. He's got 39 pressures on the year and 10 sacks. But his counterpart, Highsmith, the other edge, he's got 38 pressures, only one fewer than Watt, and 5 sacks. Not to mention on their interior defensive line, Cam Hayward is back just for funsies now. So if in the event Myers and Runyon Jr., and yeah, if they all wind up missing this game and the Packers need to try it out, 60% of a backup line, that's less than ideal no matter how high you are on Sean Rhyan and Rasheed Walker right now. Key number 2, keep an eye on Jaylen Warren. Yeah, the wide receivers get a lot of notoriety for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Deontay Johnson, he's back from his injury a couple weeks ago. George Pickens, obviously talked about a lot from the Packers side of things since they opted for Watson instead of Pickens. And then Pickens had his meltdown last week. And, lots of stuff going on with Pickens. But then they also have Allen Robinson, Calvin Austin. It's a deep and a pretty veteran group of receivers for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But one player that's not even a receiver that is developing into one of their better offensive weapons would be running back Jaylen Warren. He's like basically half the carries of Najee Harris, yet far more than half the yards. And he's got a more favorable yards per carry at 4.7. He's also a quality receiver out of the backfield. PFF's 4th highest rated receiver on the team with 260 yards all racked up after the catch already, and only a 6.5% drop rate. This is a matchup, Warren going against a particular Packer defender that I was very much looking forward to. I thought Quay Walker in coverage would have done a nice job, but of course now it looks as though Quay Walker isn't going to go. So that is one matchup. How are the Packers going to account for Jaylen Warren? Is it going to be more Devondre Campbell? Is it going to be, they're going to rely on McDuffie to do it again? Regardless, got to have a plan. Number 3, play clean. It's a tall order for these Green Bay Packers to go out there and play a clean game. And what I mean by that is not leading the league in penalties this week, not having turnovers. Don't make the mistakes yourselves. Don't shoot yourselves in the foot, which the Packers seem to do a lot as they're gaining maturity, because the Steelers will make you pay for those mistakes, and they're not going to make nearly the number you do. It's how they've gotten 5 wins on the year. It cannot be a laundry game for the Packers. It also isn't the type of game where we can see receivers trying to eke out an extra half yard, an extra yard, and then wind up fumbling. It can't happen this week because the Steelers know how to capitalize on those mistakes, and they will. Also of note here, of course, playing clean also includes on the defensive side of the ball, actually tackling. And they're coming off of tied for their best performance of the year in that regard. Only 2 missed tackles last week against the Rams, according to PFF. That is going to be necessary. And a lot of swarm technique that even Matt LaFleur talked about this week, that they're doing a better job overall of swarming to the ball carrier. It's been one of the keys for me for weeks that the Packers have to do it. They're starting to. We saw it against the Rams. They're going to have to do it against this Pittsburgh Steelers team that runs the ball about 24 times per game. Key number 4, Rashan Gary. Wyatt Clark, go feast, young men. Starting left tackle Dan Moore Jr. has been one of the worst pass blocking tackles in the league. PFF grade of 31.8 in terms of pass blocking and 21 pressures allowed, tied for the 11th worst in the NFL. And he's played fewer snaps than any of the 10 dudes in front of him. In addition, their starting center, Mason Cole. He is also one of the worst pass blocking centers in the league with a grade of 34.3. 14 pressures allowed from him. Even one of the weaknesses in Jaylen Warren's game to this point has been in pass blocking when he's relied upon to stay back there and pick up the blitz for Kenny Pickett, because he's been credited with giving up 2 sacks and has an efficiency rating of only 82% when it comes to pass blocking. The Packers pass rush specialists must get after Kenny Pickett and make him uncomfortable. Yes, as I acknowledged earlier, Kenny Pickett's been under pressure on about 40% of his dropbacks, with only a blitz rate of about 26%. Packers, raise up that pressure number and make the young quarterback for Pittsburgh uncomfortable. All in all, this is going to be a difficult game for the Packers and the Steelers. They're 2 teams that match up incredibly well. But what I really think this comes down to is which team might play cleaner? Which team may have fewer shoot yourself in the foot mistakes? And unfortunately, given where both of these teams are right now, that seems to be the Steelers, doesn't it? I won't be shocked at all if the Packers march into Pittsburgh and get a win. As noted, by the way, by Aaron Dangler on Twitter, the Packers have not won in Pittsburgh since 1970. So it'll be quite the trend reversal, to say the least, for the Green Bay Packers to march in and win this game. Still, though, I think that this really, really comes down to who makes the fewer mistakes. And as we've seen this year, it's generally not the Packers. So this should be a very, very close game. I'm expecting that it could be a low-scoring affair as well. So let's go Steelers 17, Packers 13. And if you're wondering, yeah, I hate myself for even picking against the Packers, but the logic is winning on this one. I won't be shocked at all if the Packers win. But who's going to play cleaner? Probably the Steelers. On Sunday, I'll be here for the watch party. Claudia will join us for the second half too. So come join us for the watch party. Come hang out there. Great time every single week. Would love to see you there as well. And as we've been doing lately, thank you to those of you who've been doing it. But leave a like, share, comment, anything on this video just to help out the algorithm and get the channel growing a little bit again as we once did. So thank you so much for being here today. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And as always, go Pack Go.